Tonight, as you know, is our Castan Memorial Lecture. The Solomos Society was formed in 1981 jointly by the late George Pippos, who was then president of the Greek Orthodox community of St George, and the late Dr. Castan, who was then senior lecturer in English at the University of Queensland. The aim of the association is to foster interest in the language, arts and culture of the Greek world, ancient, Byzantine and modern. Con was not only a co-founder of the society, but its president for over 25 years. My understanding is that the Solomos Greek Australian Cultural Society is the only one of its kind in Australia. Given his dedication and commitment to the Solomos, it was only fitting that we honour his memory at the beginning of each year. Our speaker for tonight is Dean Kalimniou. Dean was born in Melbourne and studied law and arts, majoring in modern Greek studies. He is a solicitor and freelance journalist, and he said I could stop there, but I won't. He is a spokesperson for the Patriotic Federation of Australia. Since 2001, Dean has written a regular column for Neos Cosmos entitled Diatribe. He is a regular columnist in Opera magazine and New York's Neo magazine. He is also a well-known poet and short story writer. He is widely noted as one of the few Australian-born Greek poets who produced literature in the Greek language. In 2021, Dean published his first bilingual Greek-English children's book, Somela and the Magic Kemenchi. His first collection of short stories in Greek was published in 2023. Dean has also translated several works of prominent Greek Australian authors from Greek into English. In November 2007, Dean was awarded a Government of Victoria Award for Excellence in Multicultural Affairs. In 2009, Dean wrote the script for Peter Stipathides' short film, The Message, and he's also written a play which has been produced in Greece, Melbourne and Sydney, and is back in Greece. I'm exhausted just looking at the list and reading the list, and when I read what he has done. And many of you may have seen Dean speak at the Alex Kondos lecture 2 years ago, I think it was, and thank you, and it was brilliant. So it was not surprising that we thought that Dean would be an appropriate speaker for our Castan Memorial Lecture. So I would like to ask Dean to come forward.
Thank you, and can I say what a privilege it is to be here tonight among such wonderful people. You could have gone to the Pink concert, but you didn't. You're here. I don't know what that says about you or about me, but we'll leave that for later. It's an honour to be presenting the Castan lecture. I want to let you know that Castan is a very, very, very important, influential thinker, academic, whose work is still being read, at least in Melbourne, and discussed and studied. And so there's a legacy there, which I think is very important. I think it's fitting that this is the meeting of the Solomos Society. Solomos can either mean salmon in modern Greek, or it refers to our national poet, whose first language was not English. His first language was Italian. He would sign his name Solomos using Roman letters, which means that there's something to be said for the diasporic Greek contribution to Greek arts and culture and letters. If it's good enough for Solomos, it's good enough for us, I feel. So tonight we're talking about the lost kingdom of Great Ionia, and we're thinking, what's that? The Chinese connection, and Greece and China are considered to be at diametrically opposed civilizations. No one's Western Hemisphere, the other one is the uttermost East. And yet what I'm going to argue tonight is that these two civilizations were connected very early on. We know that they were connected later on, for example, because of the Silk Road. And we know that the Silk Road began in Beijing. And where did it end? Anyone? No, but close. Trapezunda. Trebizond on the Black Sea, that was the terminal point of the Silk Road. So obviously during the Mongolian times, there was a bit of a connection there. But when I began to research the topic of, and I was saying to some friends before the topic for tonight's lecture, I was met with a bit of skepticism from friends and academics in Greece who said, Greeks in China, rubbish. There are no records. There are no records. This is all just nationalistic claptrap by those people who want to say that Greeks went everywhere and did everything and that we owe it all to the Greeks. Yeah, but if you're a student of Chinese history and language, which I've been, you learn very quickly that cultural memories die hard in what is possibly the oldest continuing culture in the world, which is the Chinese culture. And unlike Greece, which suffered invasions and looting, a lot of the Chinese records, archives survive, which means we as Greeks may have forgotten certain things, the Chinese remember. And it's through the Chinese sources that we're going to speak to you about these things. And that's the problem when you're looking at academics, and academics generally specialise in certain fields. You'll either be a Hellenist classical scholar, you'll be a sinologist studying China, but never will the twain meet. But then when you get things like this, which is a Hellenistic depiction of the Buddha on a sort of faux Corinthian capital, and you see a fusion, so you begin to ask questions and say, what's going on? So, what are we going to speak about tonight? We're going to talk about the kingdom of Da Yuan. So going back to these characters, that's the character Da means big in Chinese, Yuan, Ionia. And Ionia, of course, is the western coast of Asia Minor, where the Ionians settled. And so the kingdom of Greater Ionia, if you will. Many languages differentiate between Ionians and Greeks. For example, for the Chinese, Shila is Hellas. That's the way they phonetically render the word Hellas. Yavan in Hebrew is Ionia. Yunan in Turkish and in Persian. And this is because they were the first tribe that they came in contact with. We're Greeks, according to the Romans, because the Greci were the first tribe that they met. And then, of course, the Turks also differentiate between the Yunani who live in Greece and the Rum, who are the Greeks who live in what was Byzantium, Asia Minor. So there's various, call us what you will, we all know who we are. So we're looking at the kingdom of Great Ionia, which is a kind of a corollary to the Greek colonies in southern Italy, which were known as Magna Graecia, Great Greece. This is Great Ionia. So what is it? How do we know about it? And do we really accept the word of a lawyer from Melbourne that it actually existed? Yeah? So, the kingdom is described in the Chinese historical work known as the Records of the Grand Historian and the Book of the Han. And it's mentioned in the accounts of a Chinese explorer whose name was Zhang Qian in 130 BC. And he led numerous embassies into Central Asia, and the country or kingdom of Da Yuan is generally accepted as being relating to the Fergana Valley, controlled by the Hellenistic polis Alexandria Eschati, which is the utmost extreme Alexandria. Before extreme sports, there was extreme Alexandria, Eschati. You don't get further than that. So that's in modern-day Khojan, Tajikistan, which is pretty close to the modern Chinese border. So these Chinese accounts, and that's one of them, they generally describe the Da Yuan as urbanised dwellers with Caucasian features. This is a textile that's been found in China, and you can see, well, that's a bit hazy, but I can see it from here. He's got blue eyes, yeah? And they lived in walled cities, and they're described as having customs identical to those of the Dacia. Now, the Dacia were the Indo-Greek Bactrians. So Alexander the Great, he went all the way to Afghanistan. When he left, Greek settlers settled in Afghanistan, stayed there. So these people in that kingdom, which was known as the Greco-Bactrian kingdom, are described as having similar customs, traditions as the Greeks of Greater Ionia in China. Kind of like how Melbourne Greeks and Brisbane Greeks have similar customs, possibly. I don't know. I find you guys a lot more civilised and genteel, but that's just me. And this is being recorded for a Melbourne audience? Yeah, okay. And they're also being the Dayuan, so the Greeks of Greater Ionia, also described as manufacturers and great lovers of wine. The Chinese did not know how to make wine, but they learned all about it from the Greeks, because that's what we do. Wherever we go, we bring our wine with us. So now you would know that the Persians, of all people, were great people managers and loved to reassign people to different offices, and this was also the case with nationalities. So originally it was believed that the Dayuan were descendants of the Greeks who ventured from Bactria after Alexander the Great. But some scholars contend that the Greeks were there before then. We know that the Persians took over Asia Minor. Then there was the Ionian revolt, and they ruled over various Greek cities, polises, for a considerable period of time. And it's believed that some of these people were removed from their natural habitats and taken to Bactria, from where they made their own way to Dayuan, and they were the ones who began the first migration. And then obviously after that, fed by the Greek colonists after Alexander, in 329 BC, the foundation of Alexandria, Eschati, extreme Alexandria. So they're there, they're communicating with the Bactrians until they're isolated by the migrations of other tribes like the Yuezhi, the Scythians, various other peoples. So what would happen is this: when the Greeks would rebel or be troublesome or really annoying, so here we've got the map. So that's the Eastern Roman Empire. That's the Chinese Empire. So we're looking at around about somewhere here. Yeah, is where Dayuan was. So the Persians find the Greeks troublesome. They remove them, and they send them to Sogdia, which was one of the, in the far northeast of the Persian Empire, and the largest city in the northeastern outpost of the Persian Empire was known to the Greeks as Kiroupolis, after Cyrus the Great. So by the time that Persia fell to Alexander, Greek culture was, if not widespread, at least known in East Persia and the borderlands. There were Greek villages, Greek language, Greek culture in the area. And we know this because there's the famous story of the Branchide, the Branchide, who came from a city called Didima in Asia Minor. And Alexander the Great came upon them quite by chance in Central Asia, and they were shocked to find people speaking Greek in the middle of nowhere. It's kind of like when I go to country Victoria and I find Greeks in the middle of nowhere. How is this possible? I thought the only people that are entitled to be called Greek live in Melbourne. Apparently not. So he does that, and then he finds out that these were people who allied themselves to the Persians. So what Alexander does after he gets over his shock of meeting Greeks in a far-flung outpost and having been wined and dined by them, he tells his soldiers, kill them all. So the region of Fergana, which is round about generally where Dayuan was conquered by Alexander the Great in 329 BC, and it became his most advanced base in Central Asia. So he fortifies Alexandria Eschati, and that's the ruins of the city, in the southwestern part of the Fergana Valley, on the southern bank of the river Sirdarya, the old Yaxartis, where Khujand is, which was formerly Leninabad, in the state of Tajikistan. He built a 6-kilometre brick wall around the city because, I don't know about you guys, but in Melbourne, when a Greek builds a house, he builds a bloody big brick wall around the perimeter, so no one else can get in unless he says so. That's how you know that we're descended from Alexander the Great. He had garrisons there, and he would also retire his wounded veterans there. Now, a lot of people didn't want to go back to Macedonia. A lot of people needed land. He promised them land. He sent them up there. So The whole of Bactria and all these areas remain part of the Hellenistic Seleucid Empire. This is the guys who took over after Alexander died. You know, the generals started fighting amongst each other, how they were going to partition the empire, kind of like kids arguing about their dad's inheritance. So it was part of the Seleucid Empire. He was the guy that took over Babylon and Persia until about 250 BC. And then the region became independent of the Macedonian kings under its Greek governor Theodotos to become the Greek Bactrian kingdom. So going full circle. Now, the Greek Bactrians held onto their territory. There's a Greek Bactrian there. That's actually Medusa. And that was found in Tajikistan. It's amazing, isn't it? So they held onto their territory. They're dealing with the Indo-Greek kingdom in the Punjab. And according to the historian Strabo, they went even further. I always wondered about Strabo, because Strabo, Stravon, Stravos, you know, can't see, anyway. So they'll go on beyond the borders of their kingdom, and he says they extend their empire as far as the Serika and the Frini. And the Serika are considered to have been the Chinese. I don't know who the Frinians were. And they found various statuettes and representations of Greek soldiers north of the Tian Shan Mountains, and they are now on display in the Museum of Urumqi in Xinjiang, which is the western province of China, which is also known as Chinese Turkestan, where the population isn't having a good time at the moment. Yeah. So we know that the Dayuan, the great Ionians, remained a healthy and powerful civilization, and they started having numerous contacts and exchanges with China, which brings us to this gentleman here, Spiro. No. Zhang Qian, who was a diplomat and a soldier, leads an embassy into Central Asia around 130 BC, and he describes the capital city of Dayuan being the city of Juishan, which is Alexandria. The kingdom, he says, contains 60,000 families, comprising a population of 300,000. Yeah, with 60,000 trained troops, a viceroy, and a national assistant prince. Again, that's how you know that he's Greek. Because you don't only just have a prince, you've got to have an assistant prince to make sure that he's doing the right thing. And the seat of the Governor General lies to the east, and this is one of the artifacts, which is actually a vase which has been found in the region with a soldier dressed in the Macedonian armour of Alexander the Great. So it's just amazing how that penetration happens. And he comments on the fact that the customs of these people in this kingdom are said to be identical to those of the Bactrians to the south. He says, their customs are the same. The people have fixed abodes and live in walled cities and regular houses like other people. Wow. They have no great kings or heads, because every Greek is a king or a president. But everywhere in their walled cities, they have installed small kings or little kings. I mean, that's how you can tell the continuity. Yeah, you go to Melbourne, you go to Oakley, which is supposed to be the centre of Hellenism, and you say, "Hey, Proedre, Mr. President," everyone turns around, because in Melbourne, everyone is a president. Yeah, so it's important that he points out that they live in cities, because the Chinese lived in cities, and that was considered, just like the ancient Athenians did as well, that was considered a hallmark of civilization. You live in the city, you're civilized. That's where the word comes from, doesn't it? Whereas the tribes that lived around the periphery of China, the Yuezhi, the Wusun, the Xiongnu, who were the ancestors of the Huns, they were nomads. So, in the Chinese chronicles, there are comments on the appearance and the culture of the people there. Yeah. So, again, wearing the Phrygian helmet, which has just come directly from Greece. Although the states from Dayuan speak rather different languages to us, says the chronicler Shiji, their customs are generally similar and their languages mutually intelligible. This is interesting. From this we learn that in a very short space of time in this kingdom, The Koine Greek, the Kini, which was spoken by the soldiers of Alexander and then in the Hellenistic period, is already fragmenting into different dialects, which are distinct but still mutually intelligible. The men all have deep-set eyes and profuse beards and whiskers. Okay? They are skillful at commerce, remind you of anyone, and will haggle over a fraction of a cent. Even back then, they were stereotyping us, mes enfants. Women are held in great respect, and the men make their decisions on the advice of their women. Okay, I think that's changed. And they talk about the wine manufacturing. This made a big impression, as I said, on the Chinese. Round about Dayuan, they make wine from grapes. Wealthy people store up as many as 10,000 stones and over in their cellars and keep it for several tens of years without spoiling. The people are fond of wine. So there you go. Now, according to the Shiji, the Chronicle, grapes, but also alfalfa, were introduced to China from Great Ionia following Zheng Qiang's embassy. So he goes there, he checks out what's going on. We like the wine. I don't know why, but we like the alfalfa. We're going to bring that across, which is amazing. So the ambassador Zheng Qiang, he says this. Again, he says that we make wine out of grapes in Greater Ionia. He can be kept not for 10 years, but 20 or 30 years without spoiling. The people love their wine and the horses love their alfalfa. So basically it's used as a fodder crop. So the Han envoys bring back the alfalfa, they bring back the wine, and then the emperor tries growing these crops in soils in China, and they experiment with which is the best soil. And I mean, it's interesting how history repeats itself. You have a whole fledgling industry of the Chinese trying to grow grapes now in Inner Mongolia, of all places, because it's a drier climate, and trying that in that way to lessen their dependency on foreign wine imports, whether from Australia or anywhere else. So they were doing this back then as well. And then the Han Chinese, which is the Chinese Empire, decide that, okay, this is great, let's see what else we can get from these great Ionians and what we can learn from them. But when envoys from foreign states start arriving in China, what they see is that on all sides of the emperor's summer palaces and pleasure towers, says the Chronicle, they were planted with grapes and alfalfa as far as the eye could see. So this really took off. Now, you really, really, really can't be a self-respecting Greek unless you have a stoush with your neighbours. And this is the part where we start having a bit of friction with the Chinese. So Dayuan is one of the furthest states to send envoys to the Han court. The Han Chinese are a very powerful empire, and they expect obeisance, and they expect that you maintain all the decorum and all the things that you need to do when you go there in order to show that the Han Chinese are in the ascendant and you're paying homage and privilege. Except the cocky Greeks just walk up there and don't observe any of the proper rituals, diplomatic rituals, and behave with great arrogance and self-assurance, believing that they're too far away for the Chinese to do anything about it. So the Han Chinese, their envoys had a great reputation for wealth in the West. So whenever the Han Chinese ambassadors would come to the Greek kingdom, the Greeks would fleece them something mean. They'll charge them exorbitant fees for everything. How much for a souvlaki? $300, that kind of thing. So you're rich, you can afford it, don't worry about it. It's like when you go to Mykonos or Santorini, but that's another story. So Chinese are starting to get a little bit annoyed about this. And the historian Sima Qian, who ends up getting castrated, but that's another story, he elaborates further, says, the envoys, or envoys, and here are some envoys here on camels going to see the Greeks in Dayuan. True story. So the envoys were all sons of poor families who handled the government gifts and goods that were entrusted to them as though they were private property, and looked for opportunities to buy goods at cheap prices in foreign countries and make a profit on their return to China. The men of the foreign land soon became disgusted when they found out that each of the Han Chinese envoys told some different story, and considering that the Han armies were too far away to worry about it, they refused to supply the envoys with food and provisions, making things very difficult for them. The Chinese envoys were soon reduced to a state of destitution and distress, and their tempers mounting, they fell to quarrelling and even attacking each other. Now, one of the things that the Chinese envoys discovered in Taiyuan, Greater Ionia, were what they called the heavenly horses. The Greeks reared horses in the kingdom. They were sturdy horses. It was a stock that had been brought over from Europe. They were unlike the smaller horses that were prevalent in Mongolia and these regions, and they kind of liked these horses. So the whole idea was, you know what, Greeks have got horses, we like these horses, we think that we should be able to get these horses. And all of a sudden you see sculptures like that appearing in Chinese culture and art. And more scholars are now suggesting that that's as a reaction to their contacts with the Greek kingdom and the fact that these horses were greatly prized by the Chinese. They called them heavenly horses. Heavenly horses because they were so great, they couldn't believe that horses like that existed. The emperor liked them. He sent a trade mission with 1,000 pieces of gold and a statue of a golden horse, not a Trojan horse, but a golden horse, to purchase these horses from the Greeks of Taiyuan. Of course, there was already a trading relationship at this time between the Greeks and the Chinese. Not only were the Chinese exporting goods to the Taiyuan, but the Greeks also learnt from the Chinese how to cast metal into coins and weapons. So this idea of metal casting, the Greeks of Taiyuan learnt that from the Chinese. But the Greeks were thinking, well, okay, you want these horses. Started thinking about, should we give them these horses? Should we not give them these horses? And according to Chinese sources, this is what the Greeks said. The Chinese are far away from us, and on several occasions have lost men in the saltwater wastes between our country and China, because I neglect to mention that between this kingdom and China proper is a massive desert called Taklamakan Desert. Taklamakan is a word, it's a Turkic word, that means once you go in it, you never get out. Okay? It's pretty extreme. Yet if the Chinese parties go further north, they'll be harassed by the Huns. While if they go south, they will suffer from lack of water and fodder. Moreover, say the Greeks, according to the Chinese, there are many places along the route where there are no cities whatsoever, and they are apt to run out of provisions. The Chinese embassies that come to us are made up of only a few hundred men, and yet they are always short of food, and over half of the men die on the journey. Under such circumstances, could the Chinese possibly send a large army against us? What have we got to worry about? Famous last words, when the Turks were arriving in Anatolia during the Byzantine times. Don't worry about them, that's all right. Furthermore, our horses are one of the most valuable treasures of the state, and here it is. Selling the horse is like selling the Ukraine a tank. Yeah? We'd rather bury our special helicopters in the sand because there's all the trade secrets and the Americans won't let us, and it's all complicated, and it was for them too. But think of a horse as a tank at the time, the equivalent of a tank. So, according to the Chinese, the Han envoys cursed the men of Taiyuan and smashed the golden horse that they brought. So, the nobles of the Greek kingdom considered this a rather contemptuous act, and they ordered certain of their troops who lived on their eastern borders to attack and kill the envoys and seize their goods, thinking that, okay, as you heard, it's far, they're not going to do anything about it, stuff them. Except eventually the Emperor Wu found out and decided to dispatch a punitive expedition against Taiyuan. This was found in a cave in Xinjiang, and what we see here is, scholars believe anyway, is a Hellenistic, a Greek Buddhist monk venerating one of the bodhisattvas. So it just shows you how, over a period of time, there was a syncretism between the two civilizations. And we know this from India anyway, where the Greco-Bactrian kingdom, King Menander was the first Greek king to espouse Buddhism, and he made it the official religion of the kingdom. And a lot of those Buddhist tenets found their ways into Christianity later. That's another story. But definitely you had phenomena like this, which the Chinese record, and which are nowhere in the Greek national narrative. I wonder why. We can talk about that too, because I think that's interesting. So, what's interesting about the punitive expedition is this. And it just shows you how the Chinese were very similar to the Greeks. Emperor Wu says, who do I send, who do I send, who do I send? I know, I'll send the brother of my favorite concubine to go and teach them a lesson, because echitomeson, we say in Greek, it's got the in. So they sent against Taiyuan 6,000 cavalry and 20,000 infantry, mostly young men drawn from the undesirables among the border kingdoms. So now we're going to talk about the first expedition against the Greeks in 104 BC. So, in the autumn of 104 BC, Li Guangli, who was the guy who was sent to go and beat the crap out of the Greeks, sets out towards Greater Ionia with his army. While crossing the Tarim Basin in Xinjiang and Taklamakan, that desert that we referred to, the army was forced to attack various oasis states along the way because they refused to supply them with supplies. Sometimes they were unable to overcome them. So already just the arduous process of trying to get to the Greeks, because the place is so remote, is causing the army to be diminished and all these privations. So if a siege of one of these states went on for more than a couple of days, then they'd say, look, we've got to call it a day and move on without supplies. We can't waste time here. So because of these constant wars of attrition, petty skirmishes, battles, the army becomes exhausted, it becomes reduced to starvation, and then by the time they get close to Taiyuan, they've lost too many men to continue on the campaign. They suffer a small defeat on the borders, and then they say, look, we can't take on the capital, Alexandria Eskhati, known as Arshi, to the Chinese. So they say, you know what, we'll go back home. So the Greeks breathe a sigh of relief. They get a bit cocky. It's like, yeah, look what we did. We showed those Chinese. And that's a relief of the Greek army, going out to fight the Chinese. What I find interesting is that there are parallels later on with Byzantine coin depictions of emperors. And also the clothes. By this stage, you'll notice that then the flowing robes are gone, and they're wearing similar clothes to what the Bactrians would have worn and other people at the time. So, a couple of years later, the Chinese say, well, should we go for the Greeks again? Because this is just garbage. We want these horses, and we don't like them. And there are two factions, and one faction says, yeah, let's go and make the world safe for democracy. Sorry, that's the wrong war. And the other faction is saying, no, I think we need to deal with the Huns on our northern border, because that's a problem. But the emperor says, no, if we don't teach these pesky Greeks a lesson, we are going to lose prestige with the other Western states. So he gives his general a larger army, and so he sets out with 60,000 penal recruits. So it's like the dirty dozen. They get everyone out of the jails, condemned men, off you go. You're going to go and fight the Greeks. And they were actually referred to in the Chinese chronicles as the bad boys. That was their nickname. And 30,000 horses, a lot of supply animals, 100,000 oxen, 20,000 donkeys, and camels. So they were very well provisioned. They mopped up the oasis states. They didn't need their supplies in no time. So seeing this juggernaut, this massive onslaught of Chinese troops, most of these city-states along the way just surrendered without a fight. There was only one state called Luntai which resisted because they were bribed with Greek gold. And that was laid siege to, and all the inhabitants massacred. So Regardless, all this took time, and by the time he gets to the borders of the Greek kingdom, the Chinese general Li has lost half his army. I don't know how many donkeys he lost. The chronicles don't say. But he arrives at Alexandria Eskhati and lays siege to it. So what do the Greeks do? They send their cavalry forces out. I mean, the whole idea is that these horses are the tanks of the day, as we said. They're going to smash through the Chinese army, and they try and break the siege. But guess what? The Chinese have invented the crossbow by then. Yes, ouch. So while all that's going on, the Chinese engineers have been set to work trying to divert the river. Now, it is interesting. So this is a Hellenistic Greater Ionia depiction of a camel driver. Camels being prevalent in the region, camels being part of the army. This would have been one of the people that rode a camel. And with obviously the mask, not for coronavirus, but not to get the dust in the nostrils. So the Chinese, while they're decimating the horses and the Greek army, they're also working at diverting the river so that they leave the city without any water supply. 40 days later, after a siege, they break through the outer wall and they capture the enemy general Jianmi. I don't know what his Greek name would have been. I think Jianmi, Jimmy, Dimitris, probably. I don't know. So the nobles of Alexandria retreat between the inner walls and say, you know what, sorry about all that. It was all a big misunderstanding. Let's talk. And the Chinese say, well, what do you got to say? And then the Greeks say, well, first of all, what we'll do is we'll kill our king and blame it all on him. So they kill their king. His name is Wu Gua or Mu Gua in the Chinese chronicles. They think his name may have been Mavakis, Mavis, they're not sure in Greek. And they send his head to the general. Here's a present for you. We've killed our king. Now can we please surrender? And then they offer the Chinese all the horses they want, as well as supplies for the army's return across the desert, but told them, if you don't accept, we're going to kill all our horses, because you either accept, take the horses and get the hell out of here, or you'll get no horses and it was all for nothing. And surprisingly, the Chinese general Li agrees and takes 3,000 horses as well as provisions, according to the chronicles. Before departing, he plays kingmaker and he says, okay, which among you was nicest to me and took me out for a souvlaki? You. His name is Meitai. Don't know what that is in Greek. You're going to be the king. So they appoint a king, and he's a client king. He's beholden to the Chinese for his power. That doesn't work. Greeks don't accept kings that have been appointed by foreign powers, as you know from your modern Greek history. Otto the First, Bavarian king, imposed by the Germans, out. George the First, assassinated. Yeah? Constantine, thrown into exile like 2-3 times. Alexander, bitten by a pet monkey and died. I mean, even our monkeys hate kings. George, kicked out, came back in. Paul was the only one who died a king and didn't go into exile. King Constantine II, we know what happened to him. Foreign imposed Greek kings don't work. It just doesn't work. So a year after the Chinese army goes away, the Greeks of the area say, King Meitai, whatever your name is, it's all your fault, and they kill him. And the old king's brother becomes the new king. And what he does, because he's very clever, he says, okay, I don't want to kowtow to the Chinese. I'm not saying that the Chinese are now dominant, but I'm going to send my son as a hostage to the Chinese court just in case. And as a result, the Chinese send gifts to the kingdom of Dayuan, Greater Ionia, and they make peace. And of course, when the Chinese emperor sends you a gift and you accept that gift, if you're Greek, that means, oh, look at us, we get gifts. It means we're important. If you're Chinese, it means you have accepted our ascendancy over you. You've accepted the emperor's gift, which means you are now a tributary state. So there were arguments about what was the position of Dayuan at that time, just like Byzantium was supposed to be an empire, but at various stages they were tributary to the Turks, tributary to the Latins, and what have you. So That's it from the Chinese side. And as I say, we only know that this kingdom existed, and we only know that these wars took place because the Chinese historians preserved their chronicles. I mean, the Chinese were invaded by the Mongols, they were invaded by various other tribes, but their archives remained intact. We can't say that about the Greeks. Yeah? What we know about ancient Greek culture, language, was preserved in the papyruses of Egypt in the sand, often rolled up into sarcophagi with mummies. We find the poetry of Sappho rolled up in and stuffed in mummies' mouths and things like that in Egypt by accident. The Great Library of Alexandria went up in flames, as we know, and various people blame either the Arabs or Julius Caesar, whoever, it doesn't matter, it's gone. And Constantinople, the massive libraries that were there, were looted in 1204 by the Crusaders and then later on by the Turks. So all knowledge of this kingdom had been lost, which is why the Greek academics told me, it doesn't exist, you're lying. Okay? It's from the Chinese that we learn about ourselves, which is, I think, amazing, yeah? Heavenly horses. I mean, this is the Bodhisattva of compassion, Guanyin, or Avalokiteshvara. And you see how the drapery is so Hellenistic. And this shows the fusion between these two cultures. It shows how the Greeks came in contact with the East and how that influenced all subsequent depictions of the Buddha ever since, yeah? Because before, the Buddha was not depicted in Chinese or Eastern art. It was just not done. It was only when they come into contact with the Greeks, who have that iconic sculptural tradition, that things like this start happening, yeah? That's Mitsuo riding his horse off to save the day. But I mean, look at that. I mean, that could be a caricature of the 19th century. You know, the mustache, curled up, the cloak, the horse. And this was also found in a cave in Dunhuang in Xinjiang. Yeah. So these are the kinds of things I show to Greek academics to say, well, look, it's not made up. There's enough evidence to suggest that's the way. So that's it from the Chinese side, but we know that following the ancient Roman embassies to China, and there were a few, recorded in ancient Chinese histories, there were contacts between the Byzantine Empire and several dynasties of China, beginning with the Tang dynasty, and Theophylactos of Simokata wrote a generally accurate description, we believe, about the reunification of China by the Emperor Wen in 581 to 604 AD of the Sui dynasty. He talks about the conquest of the rival Chen dynasty in southern China. He goes into details, placing these events within the rule of the emperor, the Byzantine Emperor Maurice. So at this stage, after all this is finished, there are still contacts being maintained. From Chinese records, we know that Michael the Seventh, Vukas, who in the Chronicles is known as Mie Li Yi Ling Caesar, Caesar, yeah, of Fulin. Fulin was Byzantium, dispatched a diplomatic mission to China that arrived in 1081 during the reign of the Emperor Shenzong, centuries before Marco Polo's expedition. And this idea that Marco Polo brought spaghetti back from China is garbage. No, don't laugh, it's true, because first of all, think of what's the Greek word for spaghetti? Makaronia. Comes from the word makaros. Makaros means the blessed. The Greeks of southern Italy would make dough and flatten it out and cut it into strips and boil that and cook that and eat that instead of koliva in memory of their dead. And that is where, mes enfants, spaghetti in its modern form comes from, not from China, nothing to do. That's a digression, but I think it's a very important one. We also invented soft serve ice cream, but that was in a different era. No, we did. Kublai Khan in Xanadu did Kublai Khan the stately pleasure dome decree, yeah. The Mongol ruler who founded the Yuan dynasty of China also maintained correspondence with the Byzantine Greeks and hosted a lot of them in his capital, Khanbalik, which is modern-day Beijing. The history of Yuan records that a certain Aisye, which could possibly be Joseph or Joshua from the country of Fulin, Byzantium, was well versed in Western language, had expertise in fields of Greek medicine and astronomy, and he arrives in the Mongol court in China says, give me a position as the director of the medical and astronomical boards. And he did. And he ennobled him with the noble title Prince of Fulin, Prince of Byzantium. And his children are mentioned by their Chinese names, which bear similarity to their Christian names, Elias, Luke, and Anthony, with a daughter named Anastasia possibly, we don't know. So these connections are maintained and they're enduring. This Byzantine coin was found in the deserts of China. This is interesting. One of the things that the Hellenistic Greeks did, according to the chronicles, is send acrobats to the Chinese court. And apparently Greek acrobats were prized because they could do things like twist, turn, twerk. The chronicles actually discuss twerking, which I think is amazing. And Chinese emperor just loved them. This was found in Burma. And scholars do believe that it depicts Greek acrobats at the court of the Chinese emperor, who then, to show the prestige, hey guys, I've got Greek acrobats at my court, you haven't seen anything like it, sends them off to the tributary kingdoms in Burma to show off, because that's how that worked. So amazing. There's Greek acrobats in the Chinese court in Burma. More Hellenistic art from the period. Now, one of the claims that has been made recently, and this set all the Chinese really angry, plus also people who are into colonialism and everything else, is that the ancient Greeks were responsible for the terracotta warriors. Yeah? And terracotta warriors are amazing. Terracotta warriors, every single one is different, the facial features, and there's thousands of them, yeah? But they say that something like this never existed in China before. And all of a sudden these warriors turn up and they point to, some people say Greek artisans assisted, and other people go more broadly and say, well, look, there was a sculptural tradition which was introduced and permeated, and this informed the Chinese aesthetic to the point that these sculptures were made in a way which is reminiscent of possibly ancient Greek sculptures. I don't know. But what I think is that definitely there were contacts between the two civilizations, that the Greeks of China were an enduring civilization, they were there for a long time, and that obviously them, the Bactrians, the embassies, the envoys, did definitely influence East Asian aesthetics to a degree. Some people find that confronting. What they say is, why does everything good or amazing or worthwhile have to come from the West? Isn't this a way of Orientalizing, if you pardon the pun, the Chinese, who are the Orient? No, according to Edward Said and the philosophers, what happens there is that the West tries to belittle, feminize the East in order to dominate it. Greeks don't think that far ahead. They're just pleased to claim everything. And it's got nothing to do with colonialism, it's got to do with the fact that we have invented everything. Jury's out on the terracotta warriors, I don't know. But I hope that I've shown tonight that quite possibly, these contacts were enduring, these contacts remained for a period of time. But then what happened? Yes, there was that contact that I described between Byzantium and China. After the fall of Byzantium, that was sundered. You start getting accounts of Greeks going towards East Asia in the 1600s, but that's as sailors on Italian or Western ships. There was one famous guy called Yanis Gerakis, who ends up becoming the Prime Minister of Thailand in the 1600s. And if you invite me up next year, I'll tell you about it. And then you get merchants from Epirus in the 19th century going to Shanghai, and then that tradition is maintained. But the great kingdom of Yuan, Great Ionia, basically is run over by other populations. We talk about the Yuezhi, the Sogdians, the Hepthalite Huns, and they basically become assimilated with the groups that take over. I mean, they're a small group as it is. The Yuezhi, the Sake populations, they take over Indo-Bactria. For a while, the kingdom is a hybrid one. You know, the Sakians are minting coins where their actual alphabet is the Greek alphabet. with a few letters which are adapted to render their language, but that after a few years is gone, and I think that's what happened there. Assimilation, vanished, forget about it, the Greeks forget about it. I find it confronting that a lot of Greeks don't like the idea that this kingdom was in China and they were dealing with China, and I think that has to do more with the way that the Greek national narrative is constructed. We're a Western people. We contributed democracy and philosophy, and we were all great artists and scientists, and they tend to diminish that, and I think that's a great hole in our narrative. I mean, I think that there's two wonderful things about the Greek people. One is that we exist despite ourselves and our stupidity. Number two is the fact that Greeks transcend, I think, boundaries, definitions, stereotypes. You can find them everywhere, and I think that's a fascinating part of the broader story. So thank you very much, and I'd love to hear any questions if you've got any. Questions?
Maybe I didn't quite buy your narrative, but
Yeah.
so are you suggesting that this great kingdom of Ionia
Yeah.
had its origins with some remnants of Alexander's army? Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying is that it began with Greeks who were dislocated by the Persians and sent into exile into the region, and then augmented, grown, come into its own with remnants and descendants of Alexander's army and colonists who went first to Bactria and then there. Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
But in terms of the population of Greeks
Yeah.
and Chinese, can you give us a sense of dimension, like, in terms of the numbers?
Yeah, so I mentioned that there were about 300,000 Greeks in this kingdom. Now, how many of those were actually Greek and how many were native people living in the area, we've got no way of knowing. China is a multi-million population empire at that stage. They're a speck in their eye. Yeah? They're nothing compared to them. But they're remote, they're far, they're exotic, and they've got horses. Yes?
So, what's the Chinese word for heavenly horses? Is it Tianma?
Yes.
And is it, were they big horses?
Compared to the ones that they had, I mean, from what I understand, the Mongolian horses at the time were like those Przewalski horses, the really small ones, diminutive ones. So these are European horses. I don't think they'll be as big and as sturdy as the Arabian ones, but they were a step up from what they were used to.
I had read that Chinese horses weren't sturdy enough to hold armoured warriors, so they really needed them.
Yeah, basically.
They couldn't hold an armoured soldier, so they really needed the Greek.
Yeah, so they needed the sturdier horse that would bear the weight.
So there's a town in northern China called Zhonghua.
Yep.
And so I was there last year, and
Okay.
the horses there were really big. We went riding on them.
Yeah.
And they had to really jump up on them.
Yeah. I mean, consider though that from this time to then, you've got contacts with Arabia, you've got the Arab conquests, you've got a whole lot of other things going on. So to what extent the horses you're describing are descendant from these?
Sure, we can't know.
Don't know. Yeah.
Well, is your argument too, though, that even though they're very small in numbers compared to the Chinese,
Yeah.
the power of the Greek culture and civilization impacted China significantly?
Well, put it this way, what impacts a civilization? Your Chinese empire is a top-heavy dynasty which is ruled by the emperor. So if the emperor takes a liking to this and says, I'm going to do this, he's the influence of his day. Yeah, he's the TikTok of his day. If he's doing it in his palace, then everyone else starts following. And that's how that emanates down. It all takes one powerful person to say, this is what we'll all be wearing this season, and everyone else falls into line, yeah?
So that's how they...
So it's not as if it was, it wasn't as if there was this great contact between your average Chinese person saying, wow, look at these Greeks, they're amazing, we want to copy.
Right.
It's imposed from above.
Right.
Yeah.
You spoke about winemaking.
Yeah.
Is there any evidence in Chinese literature for that tradition having to do with their culture?
Oh no, it did. They've got a wine-making tradition ever since, in dribs and drabs. But that's where it came from, and they freely acknowledge that.
Is the Chronicle of Theophilatos still visible?
Yeah,
So
yeah, you can look it up.
it's available.
It's available online. Yeah, $9.99 Kindle, but yeah, you can get it wherever you need to get it from.
And the statue of the Hellenistic Buddha, was that from India, was it?
No, that was from Bactria, Gandhara. Yeah. And obviously those things permeate further east. Yeah.
Metro in New York has a statue which is purported to be because of the contact between Greeks and Chinese. And that is the a fighter, a wrestler.
Yeah.
Which is like very, very big and very, their comment was that they didn't make these things, the Chinese did not have these things, and they took that out from the.
Yeah, so here we have to be careful. To what extent is that, for example, traders or people bringing this back to the emperor saying, "Oh, look at this is interesting. Look what we found out. Look what we found on our travels," rather than an influence. Influence and objet d'art and souvenirs need to be separated. I mean, I would hate to think that, for example, our aesthetic is based on souvenirs from Monastiraki. But if you go to most Greek people's houses in Melbourne, it is. But you see what I mean? There's a danger there. Yeah.
One more thing. Did you say that they call the Ionians Yunani or Yunnan?
Yeah, Yunnan. Yunnan means Ionia.
Being used.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Yunanistan in Turkish.
I mean, Indonesia.
Yeah, everywhere.
Africa.
All around the Arab world.
Yeah.
But they distinguish between Yunanistan, Yunnan, who are the modern Greeks, and the Rum. So if you're from Asia Minor, you're a Rum, you're not Yunnan now. But Yunnan was because the Ionians were the first people the Persians came across, so they called them the Yunnan. The Egyptians called them something completely different because they came across other people, and the Philistines were actually a Cretan tribe. I mean, it's very big now because of Palestine. Palestine comes from the word Philistia, Paleshet, which is the Egyptian word for the Philistines, and apparently the first Philistines came from Crete and then were assimilated into the local Canaanite culture and population. So there's a bit of trivia for you as well. Any other questions? Yeah.
Well, China is one of the great civilizations.
Absolutely it is.
China, India, Babylon, Egypt, Greece,
Texas.
and the modern West.
Yep.
So, where would people put China and Greece in terms of contribution to world ideas?
Well, look, I mean, that's subjective, isn't it? It depends on what you value and what you prize. What I find with Chinese people is that they greatly respect and revere Greek culture for two reasons. One is longevity. They both feel that this is a culture which is equal to the Chinese because it's got that continuous thread running through it. Two, a lot of the philosophy is similar, or the motivation behind the philosophy is similar. Three, I mean, you find uncanny things like the meander key, which also appears in Chinese art, and you can argue who introduced it to who, or whether these things developed, autonomously and just coincidentally the same, and what have you. But yeah, I think that depends on how can you rate a civilization? The criteria will have to be subjective. Yeah? Yes?
I was just wondering which Chinese language do they use the word big star?
Sorry?
You're saying that the word big is star, but which Chinese language uses that word?
Da, Mandarin.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, in Mandarin, da means big. And yeah. No further questions? One more.
I'm just wondering what made you connect with the Chinese Greeks, because not many people involved with the
Tell you a story.
Greek tradition.
So when I studied Chinese at school. I became enamored of the Chinese language and culture, and then I started learning Chinese traditional folk instruments. And the one that I learned was called the erhu, which is like a lira. It's a bowed instrument. It's got two strings, and the bow is actually sitting between the strings. While I was doing this, I was also playing in that Embetico band in Melbourne. And we used to go to the Pondian Club, in Melbourne and played Embetiko. And one day I decided it'd be a funny idea to bring the Urhu along and play that Embetiko music on that. Now, for those of you who may not know, Pondians are like the equivalent of the Irish in Greek culture, yeah? So I'm playing, and this Pondian guy comes up to me and he says, "What's this? Τι είναι αυτό?" I'm telling him, είναι Κινέζικη λύρα, this is a Chinese string instrument, whatever. Just, I mean, you speak really good Greek for a Chinese guy. To which I replied, "Are you Pondian?" And he said yes. And I was telling the story to my wife. She goes, "Come to think of it, you really have small eyes, and I reckon you may have been Chinese." So we're in Greece, and we get into a taxi, and I'm telling the taxi driver, "You know, I'm going to take him to my grandmother's house, who's here, and this is the road you're going to take, and you're going to go this way, not that way, because I know what I'm talking about. I'm like a native." And he goes, "You know what? It's quite strange. I thought you were Chinese." My wife's smirking, trying to not laugh. I'm like, "What made you think that?" He goes, "Very small eyes." So we leave Greece. I wanted to leave straight away after that. And we're in Europe, and we catch up with, we meet some businessmen from Shanghai. And we're talking, and he says, "Sorry, can I ask you a question?" I said, "What?" He goes, "Have you got Chinese ancestry?" And my wife says, "If they're claiming you as one of your own, you're Chinese." So I did a DNA test, and lo and behold, I'm 100% Asia Minor and Greece. Which my wife says, "Well, now I know where your lack of ambition comes from. Your ancestors had no ambition to do anything. They just stayed put. Hers is all over the place." So that's a very, very long and convoluted story in order to tell you I've always been fascinated by Chinese culture. And because I'm fascinated by everything Greek, I'm always looking to test the uttermost extremities of what Greeks do. You know, there's stereotypes about who Greeks are. What I want to do is exhaust those stereotypes and say that Greeks cannot be defined because they're just so A, complicated, B, multifaceted, C, fascinating. Yeah.
Well said.
I just make an observation concerning the Greek civilization and other civilizations.
Yeah.
What I understand is the great contribution of the Greek civilization to the world is the fact that we didn't believe in predestination. We didn't have a caste system. The way you were born that was going to be the way you would be forever. The difference with the Greeks is the religion. They made fun of their gods. They had all the follies of human beings in relation to being able to control their own lives and make a change in their life. That was what I understand to be the big contribution of Greek civilization and distinguished it from all other civilizations, ancient Egypt, ancient China, and that, where you had a caste system, and when you were born into that caste, you were there for the rest of your life.
That's definitely the Western interpretation which underpins the Western identity. Yeah? That's what Westerners believe of ancient Greece, and that's what they appropriate to show that they're civilized people. I'm a bit skeptical about that for many reasons which I won't go into, but one thing I'll say is this. Imagine if we're all gone tomorrow and archaeologists 1,000, 2,000 years later find a library and read Bertrand Russell, and read all the great philosophers, modern philosophers, and I'll say, wow, these people, these civilizations walked around being sage-like and whatever. Imagine if they find a video cassette containing the collected works of Donald Trump. We don't know enough about the common people and whether all these things that remained, which were from the top, how much of that permeated the lower classes. We know that the ancient Greeks had slaves. We know that the ancient Greeks didn't, especially in Athens, didn't treat women very well. One thing that I'm interested in and I'm researching now is the fact that ancient Greeks in Athens had to be veiled, the women, when they went out. They wore a hijab almost, which doesn't sit well with the idea of the enlightened Greeks who loved bodies and whatever. There's a difference between the art and the way you present yourself and how you actually are and what the tensions are. So yes, that is the Western interpretation. I would encourage you to think about that though. Yeah, because it is true and it isn't true at the same time. Or maybe it is. Thank you. I think I'll quit while I'm ahead.
So Dean, thank you so much.
Please take over the microphone.
I just want to thank you so much for an incredibly interesting talk.
None of you fell asleep.
No way. No, you weren't. It was just fascinating. It's a part of our history that none of us really knew about. Well, I never knew anything about it. I like hearing about influence, and I often wonder about how, as different peoples have moved around the world, the influences and how we've influenced each other. So it's hard to know who influenced who in certain situations when you look at the commonalities. Who did it first, I often wonder. So, and I just don't care really. I just think it's happened and we all enjoy it. So thank you very much. I'm now going to ask Vula Castan to come over and do a vote of thanks. Thank you, Vula.
Well, what a fascinating topic.
Thanks.
And we've been very fortunate to have a very gifted speaker make a special trip all the way from Melbourne to address us on a fascinating topic. And thank you for honouring my husband.
He was an amazing man. We miss him.
Which of course will always be in my heart forever. And that's why I'm giving the thanks, because I want to thank you for such a wonderful presentation, very well researched by a scholar in your own right, and you've done so many different areas of great contribution. So that's wonderful, not only as a Greek, but as an Australian as well. So I think that's wonderful, and I thank him for all of that. And of course, I thank each one of you here for coming tonight. That's very special for me, to see each one of you. I know so many of you in the audience, and I love you all for caring to come, for caring to keep Solomos alive, and for Solomos to continue. Without your support, it couldn't happen. But of course, behind all that is an absolutely marvellous lot of people. The executive, led by Francine. Without the dedication of those volunteers who've taken on the legacy that was given, I wouldn't be able to stand here. So firstly, after my thanks to you, goes my thanks to the executive and my thanks to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you all. Please join us next month, I should say, back at the Respite Centre where we would normally meet. We have Amelia Brown, talking next month about Sappho's daughters, ancient Greek women, music and lyrics. And I know it's a good talk because I heard it at Bunny, but I know a lot of people in this room weren't there, so it's an excellent talk. We have supper available, so please help yourself to supper. Thank you very much.